They'll hang out on air live.
Nobody's going to know what that means.
No, I like it that they come in. They always come in the middle of whatever we were talking about.
It's like a book.
It is. It really is. No, we know what we're talking about, or at least I know how to sound like I know what I'm talking about. And Matt Waldman and Gene Bramwell do actually know what they're talking about as we preview Week 9.
On the weeks we don't.
Yeah.
But who knows the difference, right?
Exactly. We don't know until after. That's the big reveal every week in the NFL. And this week has got the slow burn, although we did have the great Nick Mullins story Thursday night. Sorry, we missed you all Thursday night. We had to have a medical absence. And then, but early games will ramp up, and then late games are excellent. And then Titanic clash with some question marks. I guess let's start with the Titanic clash, Gene, because you have the unenviable job of trying to interpret, decipher information. At the very least, you have your encyclopedic knowledge of how these teams have managed this information and how we should interpret it in light of how we've seen results in the past based on what we've gotten as precursors. We got two big names, although maybe with Rob Gronkowski, you're almost relieved that you have, like, oh, I should play David Njoku over him or Vance McDonald over him, because Sony Michel, Rob Gronkowski in what could be the highest scoring game of the day. But what's our guidance on whether they're going to play tonight?
Well, the problem with Gronkowski is we know he's not healthy. He took a week off, well, close to a full week off, and had 2 weeks to recover. And we hoped that we had seen a much healthier, from a back perspective and an ankle perspective, Gronkowski, but he just didn't look like himself at all in that Monday night game. Wasn't elevating at all to get passes above his head, really was struggling to gain separation because he couldn't get to top speed and move laterally. And I think, you would see Gronkowski over time maybe morph into that Antonio Gates, Tony Gonzalez, Jason Witten type of player where he's smart and crafty enough. He already knows how to use his body, but he tends to win on just being more athletic than anybody else. So that looks like it's on the verge of going. And we've had that discussion for years now. That players that have multiple back injuries, at some point it's going to go, and it's likely to go quickly. Hopefully that's not what we're seeing with Gronkowski, but when you got a couple of different things going on, it's just hard to play through. However, last week he played 68 snaps while looking like an old man, and he tends to do that if he's active. And the Patriots will allow him to do that. It's been that way for weeks and years, really. And, we did see some stuff, I'm kind of going on here a little bit with the arm and whatever. So I kind of thought that it was likely that we'd see Gronkowski play tonight. So Adam Schefter's report this morning that both of these players are a little bit more of a game time decision was interesting to me, and it's also telling. However, there's not been much in the way of accurate reporting on New England over the past month. There have been some surprise inactives that we didn't expect until we got a lot closer to game time. There was an Ian Rappaport report last week that Josh Gordon was going to be disciplined, and he wasn't. So it wasn't too surprising that we didn't get a lot of information this morning until a little bit later in the day. So I don't know what to think about Gronkowski. Michel is an entirely different issue too. We know that the Patriots are going to rest players no matter how important they are, Gronkowski included, if they're not healthy, if they can't be counted on to do what they would ordinarily do in the game plan. And we also know that Patriot players who aren't going to play don't talk to the media on Friday. Bill Belichick doesn't want any, especially a rookie, to get out there and maybe, let the other team or anybody know what might be going on. So it was unusual for Michel to be so forthcoming with the media, although he said it's up to Belichick whether I play. He was there saying I'd play on one leg if I could, which would tend to make you think that he was trending towards playing. We also know that the medical staff was comfortable enough to let Michel do some practice on Saturday in hopes that he'd be able to get through a full week of limited practice this week, which he did. So that was a good sign as well. So I felt like the trend on Michel was pretty positive as well. Not to the point where he'd necessarily see 50% of the snaps where he had been sharing things pretty evenly with James White based on the formation and whatever else. And I don't think we could necessarily expect 15 to 20, total touches, but I felt like he had a pretty good chance to play. So I'm not really sure that note from Schefter would generally make me nervous. The fact that the Patriots have been throwing reporters curveballs for the better part of a month is also a little bit concerning. So I'm not sure. I think we're probably going to get a little bit more information as the afternoon goes on, but it's very possible we're not going to know anything else until inactives come out. So I'm going to let you guys talk about what options are out and where we're going to go with this. Otherwise, but I'm a little bit less confident now than I was when I woke up this morning that both of these guys were going to play and at least have a chance to put up some statistics.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers here. And Matt will also talk about the non-injured layers. This is, well, I mean, it's hard to say that the Rams Saints isn't the game of the day. We have two amazing Titanic clashes today. And the games are going to have ripple effects in the standings, in the playoff picture, but games that are also going to have ripple effects. We're in week 9. You know, the clock is ticking for fantasy teams. Every decision is important. Let's start with Gronk and Michelle. And I mean, I think at this point, it pains me to say it. It really does pain me. Like, it hurts. I feel a pain in my soul that Gronk has been giving us hasn't been worth waiting around for anyway. So look to the waiver wire, find your best option. If there's absolutely nothing, and when I say find your best option, I mean there are some options out there this week. Like hopefully you might be able to pick up Jordan Thomas and Brian Griffin is going to be back this week, right?
Yes, he's off the injury report. I'm not really sure why he wasn't back last week, but no concern with him this week.
But still, with Kiki Cutie out, and I'm spoiling Gene's report there, but this was already announced yesterday. Kiki Cutie's out. I still think Jordan Thomas, with what he's been riffing with Deshaun Watson, like I'd play him over Rob Gronkowski's point. Vance McDonald, I would play. Chris Herndon, I would play. Guys like David Njoku and OJ Howard and guys like that, like those are no-brainers. Even if we have to go deeper, Matt, if I had to play
Jeff Swaim,
Dixon, well, Swaim's hurt, right?
No, you're not. We're not playing Jeff Swaim.
We're not playing Jeff. And I would love to say Rico Gathers, but then you're relying on rational coaching. I mean, maybe this is the Rico Gathers breakout week Monday night, but that's another problem, right? I mean, Lance Kendricks. I mean, there's not a hedge on Tennessee because they're not throwing to the tight end, or Dallas, or
Michael Roberts.
Okay, but he's playing an early game. So what I'm saying is, if you're weighing Gronk against another tight end, unless, I mean, the line would be guys like, I don't know, Charles Clay, Mark Andrews, Jesse James. Here's where I'm like, well, just wait around and see what you get from Gronk. But otherwise, we're benching Gronk this week.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say we are benching Gronk this week, and I would say Mark Andrews is one who is a viable guy. He's actually performed pretty well in recent weeks in terms of at least getting the ball, getting targets, making good on them, making some plays in tight coverage, so you feel pretty good about that. But yeah, I mean, if what you're going to get is old man version of Gronkowski, then what you may get there from that is some hitch routes. And then maybe a lumbering up the seam where the ball flies over his head and he's a step slow because he can't move. I mean, those are the types of things that you may see, and you're just going to hope that somehow he springs wide open on a play, catches the ball long, and is there long enough to give you about 60 yards, and then he's out of the game. I mean, those are the types of fears I'd have.
Yeah, I think it's just too bad. But on Michelle's a little different because, as Gene said, he talked to the media. And certainly, a la that Kansas City game, you would expect that as a part of the plan to defend Aaron Rodgers, Sonny Michel gets the ball 20 times or 15 times, and that the Patriots do a good job opening holes for him. Or is it? Or is this where you say, like, nah, even if you have to play Ito Smith or Tevin Coleman in a bad matchup or whatever your other option is, you're going away from Michel. Are we optimistic or pessimistic about Michel? Is he worth waiting for?
I'm pessimistic about Michel mainly because I think that the game script is going to be as such where you're going to see a lot more James White, and the team has seemed to be comfortable enough without Michel. I mean, it's not what they want to be long term, but it still seems to be an issue where I don't see them being in the game script to pound that ball. And New England didn't look all that good last week opening creases. I really thought that they would be much better being able to do that the way that they looked in previous weeks. But they weren't. So I would probably roll with a number 2 player who was getting enough time, because really that's what you're comparing Michel to. Michel kind of is a number 2 back in this offense, platooning with James White.
Really quickly, we're going to spend some time on this game because we should, and we may not ever get to see this matchup again. Gene, Rex Burkhead's in the locker room around. We don't know much about his injury because it's the Patriots. He's eligible to come off IR in week 13. Should we start thinking about putting a Post-it note up in our head in a couple of weeks, come back to this and maybe pick him up?
What have you heard about Burkhead, Just that he's walking through the locker room. I actually
Yeah.
didn't see any reports on him this week. So my concern from the beginning has been, it was kind of marked as a neck injury, but I've been wondering whether or not they were planning on an extended recovery from a recent concussion. Not that they were, that they should have marked it down as a concussion rather than a neck injury, but a neck injury that lands you on IR is generally something. I would think it would be something that would take 6 to 8 weeks, much longer than that to recover, and he'd be less likely to return. So, but it's hard to say. But whereas, if we knew that he had just recovered from a concussion earlier in the year, had another one within the same month, very likely to kind of hold him out for a month or so anyway, knowing that they had that big, heavy, deep depth chart to work through with Michelle hopefully coming back and James White playing well and all of the other players they can have that go through there, that maybe he'd be able to come back. So I'll look into that a little bit more and have some more on Monday. But the fact that he's back in the locker room is a pretty good sign that they're planning on recovering him. And I think you're correct. I'd have to look back at my notes, but I think it was week 12 or 13. Whatever it was that he's first eligible to come back. And if he's already showing some signs that he's back in the locker room, then that means that there wasn't a surgical concern with the neck, that there isn't probably any longer a functional concern there, and that he's probably is likely to come back at that point. I just hadn't heard yet that he'd been back with the team at all.
And really quick before I throw it back to Matt and we talk about the fantasy implications of this game. Geronimo Allison, doubtful, so basically out. What about Randall Cobb on the other side?
Yeah, I think Cobb's going to play. This is pretty similar to what both of these guys were last week, where we'd seen some full practice toward the end of the week, and they're not fully healthy, so the Packers aren't taking them off the injury report entirely. But I think, again, this is going to be a question for you guys. What I wrote yesterday was that, they rotated all of their wide receivers last week and kind of mixed and matched. So the question for me with Cobb would be, if you feel like Equanimeous St. Brown is going to be able to approximate much of what Geronimo Allison did, then are we going to continue to see a rotation between Valdez-Scantling and Cobb in the slot? I think that's the question to be asked. I don't think this is an injury situation as much as how do you think Mike McCarthy is going to put his wide receivers formation-wise and scheme-wise.
Yeah, and if I'm going to simulate Mike McCarthy, I don't know, I'm going to do bang
Good
my
luck
head on my desk a little while until I feel a little woozy, and then I'll look at my lineup and say, I guess I just do what I did last week and last year and the year before that. Okay, Matt, this is a fun game. Let's take the Patriots side first. And you've already mentioned James White, and people aren't asking whether or not to play James White. I guess the angle, there are lots of DFS angles here because we're looking at this game potentially producing the most a top end of expectation outcomes, because as you said, we do expect a game script that focuses on quarterback play, and we know that Aaron Rodgers in particular can move the ball down the field very quickly with the weapons he has. Let's talk about the Patriots side though first, because we've got Josh Gordon maybe locking up with Jair Alexander, who looked like an instant all-pro last week. We've got Julian Edelman, we've got James White, we've got Chris Hogan. We know that Hogan had a much better game when Rob Gronkowski was out. So who out of our Patriots do we like to most exceed that typical range of where they land on the fantasy stat sheet?
That's a good question. And I think that when you think about how this team has worked out, I mean, certainly you'd want to see a healthy Sony Michel because they've been able to pound the ball a good bit. But that's the big question mark here, is whether or not the New England defense can stop the Packers offense long enough to be able to make that a reality. So it's kind of a boom bust game, if you ask me. There's kind of an underrated boom bust element to this New England Patriots offense. I think that really, when you look at Jair Alexander, the thing that was most impressive was, while he played physical, playing physical against Brandon Cooks is basically, pinning Special Delivery Jones in the old 1980s WWE.
That's why he was on the card.
That's why he was on the first part of the card. I mean, so Brandon Cooks is a great speedster, but he's not very physical at the catch point, and Jair Alexander knew that. But what was impressive about Alexander was his speed, his makeup speed, his ability to stay with Cooks, his ability to track the football, which all give him a pretty good shot against a guy like Josh Gordon, except for the fact we haven't seen him try to play physical against a guy like Josh Gordon, who can basically push aside Aqib Talib like he's a flea and continue moving down the field. And if Alexander doesn't, and he's a shorter guy. He's a smaller guy. So can he stack up against a guy like Gordon? Certainly Brent Grimes couldn't do that. And there's a lot of Brent Grimes to Jair Alexander's game when you think about how they compare physically. So I would say Josh Gordon's still a pretty good bet. I would still probably play him. I wouldn't be surprised if they say that's not working out, or Julian Edelman's getting open, but maybe we should move Alexander against Edelman and we can have a more experienced guy or cover two, put two people to bracket Gordon. And that's kind of how I would probably look at it. So in that respect, I think Gordon is probably the play here. James White is definitely the play here. And those are the guys that I expect to exceed expectations.
Okay, on the Packers side, first and foremost, Ty Montgomery got himself a ticket out of town. Now, again, this is the Mike McCarthy factor. It stops us from saying, oh, this is the Aaron Jones week. Aaron Jones, every time he even touches the ball 10, 11, 12 times, he'll get 50 to 80 yards and a touchdown. Is this a week that you break ties ahead in favor of Aaron Jones? You try to find a way to get Aaron Jones in your lineup?
No, because of the fact that the Patriots will do things with pressure and blitz pickups that they trust Jamal Williams enough in that area. I mean, Aaron Nagler's little Twitter video of the barroom bouncer, seeing a guy come in down the hallway of a club and just kind of just bulldoze him out the front door and saying that's Jamal Williams pass protection to a T. That's why they keep him in that lineup, and he's a good receiver. So, and also you can see Mike McCarthy, whether you think that's good or not, going, well, I like big on big in this particular matchup. Yes. So, and going with a more physical Williams in that respect. So I think that really when you're looking at this situation, you're probably looking more just at the passing game as a whole, and the running game only as a bye week flex kind of play option with high upside.
Yes. And by the way, I just want to say again, my brain is still stuck on this. That was an incredible professional wrestling reference, because what was it in the first WrestleMania? King Kong Bundy pinned him in 9 seconds. Was that it? Right?
I don't know.
Special Delivery Jones, I think, got pinned in 9 seconds. Former NFL player, right?
I think so. Yeah. A lot of them were,
Yeah. So anyway, on that Packers passing game, similarly, if you have Marcus Valdes-Scantling, you might be trying to find a way to get him in. So there's some players, and I'm seeing, and this is what's so great about, by the way, to everybody who's listening or watching that is a writer or an analyst in the fantasy industry, spending time answering people's questions, spending time interacting with your listeners, readers, consumers, clients, helps you understand what is on people's minds. And I'm getting questions. I'll give you a common question I'm getting this week, Matt. DJ Moore or Traquan Smith or Marcus Valdes-Scantling? You can see where we're at here. Like these are the rookies. They are all in tremendous matchups this week. They're all in tremendous situations, good quarterbacks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll just toss it to you like that. Like if I said to you, I have all three of these guys, Marcus Valdes-Scantling, Traquan Smith, and DJ Moore. Rank them for me.
DJ Moore, Marcus Valdes-Scantling, and then maybe in the middle, just above Scantling, is Traquan Smith. And the main B is that when you look at DJ Moore, Tampa Bay can't defend the middle of the field worth a darn. DJ Moore is the middle of the field for the Carolina Panthers offense. And in addition to the fact that they're probably going to give him a lot more running looks, just like they did last week, because they're getting a clue about how to use that option offense all over the field. So that's great. And then when you look at Smith, mainly because there aren't a plethora of options for them to use. And Smith is someone that they're trying to force feed the ball a little bit more in certain respects. And he's done well enough in terms of what they ask him to do that, he can go up and win the ball. Now the thing with Marcus Valdes-Scantling is that when you look at the Patriots offense, where they're weak, you look at DeAndre Hopkins, Marvin Jones, and then after that you go to Tyreek Hill and then, looking further down, those are the three players that actually had really worthwhile fantasy weeks. What do they have in common? They can go up and win the ball at the catch point as rebounders. And even Keelan Cole was that type. It made that type of play. So who are the guys on the Packers offense that do that well? Well, Devontae Adams, and I think that Scantling is probably better than the others because Equanimeous St. Brown has the skills to do that kind of thing. But what I saw with him is that he wasn't great at that at Notre Dame. There's like a switch that goes off. It's like having a phone where like the signal drops when you're at home. It's like that's what happened. Equanimeous St. Brown, for me, his game has been when the ball's about to come home, the signal drops. So I would prefer a guy like Scantling probably in this game, who still Aaron Rodgers felt was ahead of those rookies.
And Jimmy Graham against the Patriots linebackers, hopefully. We'll see. He did when they did that wide receiver rotation last. Well, the Rams did a really good job limiting the plays for the Packers. The Packers offense was barely on the field in that game, and then Ty Montgomery messed it up further. But circling all the way back to one thing you said is I agree, and this is one of those things where I'm an optimist and I want to be optimistic and excited and enthusiastic. But as soon as you hear that Ty Montgomery's traded, now it's finally Aaron Jones' time. But I think you're right. I think it's in Mike McCarthy's time. It's like, I could put Jamal Williams out there more to close the barn door. Gene, unfortunately, Minnesota's going to open the barn door and maybe let Dalvin Cook play today. And we had a situation with Matt Breida where they talked about him being on a pitch count, and then he went out and basically dominated the backfield. And I hated seeing Raheem Mostert go down on Thursday night. It looked like he was finally coming into his own. But you had Latavius Murray. You're ready to fire him up this week against Detroit. What do we do now?
Hope that Cook doesn't aggravate his injury today if he plays. So the difference in the reporting this week was Cook has been more confident all week long than he has really been at any point since he first sustained the hamstring injury way back in week 2 or 3. Whatever it was. He says he's confident in where he is. The medical staff got him back where he needed to be. Still hedged a little bit, saying that we have to be careful about these things, and you never really know until you're actually out there at full game speed conditions. You can't simulate that in individual drills. You can't simulate that in 11-on-11 drills. But he feels ready to go. And the Vikings have been trying to let him play when he's been confident in the past. So, but I'm with you guys. It just sounds weird. So if we're not fully confident about the hamstring, why are we going to allow him to play on a pitch count? If it is a conditioning issue and they feel like his hamstring really is fully recovered, but they're worried about how many snaps he can play just because he's out of shape, that also puts him at risk of injury, whether it's an aggravation of the hamstring or something else. So you wonder whether or not maybe everybody would like him to play, but man, that bye week sure looks nice next week. And we may end up finally hearing that the Vikings choose caution again. The difficult thing here is, though, when Courtney Cronin of ESPN says he'll play 8 to 12 snaps or 15 to 20 snaps, those 15 to 20 snaps are not going to be he's going in there to pass block. So even a running back that gets 15 to 20 snaps, you see this with Isaiah Crowell, you see this with all these guys, they're going to use him on those snaps. So 15 to 20 snaps doesn't necessarily mean 3 to 4 touches like it would with a wide receiver or a tight end or something else. So that's the really difficult thing. If he's feeling well enough to take more than those 10 to 12 snaps and he does get 15 to 20, you could see him take 10 to 15 carries and totally mess up the distribution of touches with Latavius Murray and otherwise. So I still think the bottom line here, regardless of who you have on your roster, is you want to see Cook get through this week without any aggravations or new injuries so that when we get week 11, he's flying at his pre-injury workload. But there's still a lot of question marks here. And I don't think, even though people are saying that he's on a snap count, I don't think it's easy to project how many touches he's going to get out of that at all.
No, it's not. And while we're on the Minnesota subject, as you said, bye week next week, which I think played into why Kiki Cutie's not going to play this week too.
Absolutely. And he's going to Denver. So we know we've talked about this with all of the guys. I mean, this isn't sickle cell trait, but the same theory applies. Muscle fatigue leads to higher risk of injury. And if you've already got a muscle, that's as much to do with it as the bye week.
So on the Stephon Diggs front, though, there's not necessarily a question mark whether he's going to play this week. It sure looks like when you call up Chad Beebe from the practice squad that he's not going to play. And fantasy players who have had Stephon Diggs kind of rejoice because when he plays while he's questionable, it generally does not go well. Is this a long-term concern, though?
This is a weird situation. Diggs didn't practice all week, and it seemed like they made this decision pretty early on. So there's enough of a concern there where they didn't. It seems like they didn't feel like he was that close. This isn't. Generally, they're painful to play through. If you get hit on them again, it's not
right. Like this is like a muscular thing in his rib cage, not necessarily like a cartilage or a broken rib.
I don't know what it is. Was that reported specifically to that? I mean, I don't know. I mean, the way he kind of lifted his hand up underneath, I'm not really sure, whether, there's all kinds of things that can be bruised up in there. There's organs that live underneath there. There's bone, rib, there's cartilage between the ribs. There's muscle there as well. If you get a bruise in that oblique muscle, it's pretty painful to turn. It's either something that's a little bit more than we expected is, or it's something that they feel like may be aggravated. I don't know. This is just a little bit odd because Mike Zimmer in the middle of the week said he can play without practicing. And Diggs said, I'm planning on playing. I don't need to practice. All of that stuff, right? So I think we're going to have a much better idea tomorrow about what's going on with Diggs than we are today. And this is just another indication, we're going to let Cook go, 6 weeks after he originally injured, and he's not been fully practicing, and he's likely not fully healthy to the point where you want to put him on a snap count. But Diggs can't practice at all because we got the bye week next week. I don't know. Something's a little bit fishy with this, and it may be nothing, but I'm interested to see what the Vikings say about Diggs after the game today and on Monday.
So, and do you have any Latavius Murray decisions, Matt, or how would you advise people that have Latavius Murray decisions today?
I'd say that this is one of those situations you're playing the Detroit Lions who their gap fits stink, for the most part on defense, and they give up Christmas gifts to runners pretty much on a weekly basis. So I would say that a guy like Latavius Murray, if you're thinking about, this is going to be one of those situations that I can see a lot of people going, I started Aaron Jones and I should have started Latavius Murray, and I would never thought to start Latavius Murray. But at the same time, you can understand how what Gene says is that Cook could be used and then he goes off and has a big game. But I'm thinking that most likely Latavius Murray is going to get enough snaps that he'll be useful, but you're thinking along those lines of Jamal Williams, Isaiah Crowell, that running back three kind of element there. And again, we wonder about the coaching element, just like if Mike McCarthy acts like someone who had a pound of cheese for breakfast. It's, maybe the same thing. Does the same thing happen with lutefish or whatever they have in Minnesota? I don't know.
That's a good reference too. The Matt Wallman references are on fire this morning. So really quickly, with Diggs likely out, is this Laquan Treadwell week? Is it Kyle Rudolph? Go ahead.
I think it might be because Kirk Cousins hasn't had any issue with targeting Treadwell, even with his drops, and what we see is what tends to happen is there's a little bit of announcer bias with guys like Treadwell, when Schoolmarm, Joe Buck and Troy Aikman get on, they talk about, they always focus on the negative with every player after they focus on the positive, but the negative's always focused on last, so it's the lasting impression, and then they bring it up over and over again, and if the player dropped the ball once. So it's a situation where it's, people are prone to get that perception, but they may ignore the fact that he's made some good catches also on some key plays. And even when they do, it's like, oh, he caught the ball. It's kind of that kind of thing. So, yeah, Treadwell's dropped enough passes that you're not going to rely on him every week. But Cousins has been confident in him. And I think that it's not like they're going to bring Chad Beebe in and he's going to get, 8 for 120. It's going to be Treadwell's going to get his shot this week. And it's most likely that he's going to get the benefits of decent enough coverage that I could see him having like a 5 for 75 game and maybe a touchdown and feel pretty good about it.
On the other side of this game, Matt, Theo Riddick's going to be back. So let Kerryon Johnson, we can keep referencing back to, Aaron Jones and Latavius Murray, for instance, or even Sony Michel, if we're going to put him in the mix. Kerryon Johnson with Theo Riddick back, with what we're projecting in this game, because we've seen the Detroit Lions go from 35 carries to running backs to 8 carries for running backs. We know what they want to do, but we also know that their defense doesn't always let them do what they want to do. How do you feel about Kerryon Johnson today?
I'd feel pretty good about him, and I'd take the chance just because of the fact that the Minnesota Vikings offense is weakened a bit, that they doesn't have Diggs, and that creates some issues with, they're going to try it and go with Treadwell, then they'll go with, it's not an offense at full strength. So I think when you look at it from that standpoint, and also the Lions are fairly opportunistic. I mean, you can see that they have a fairly opportunistic defense, and I still think that Kirk Cousins still has that button that if you just hit that button just so, he goes into throw it at all costs, throw it at all costs, kind of mode. He's gotten better at it, but it's still a little bit there. And I think when the conditions are right, like this game, we could see a little bit of that. So I look at that and I think that with the Lions offense, you've got, Riddick, Michael Roberts, and TJ Jones all trying to make up for the possibility, make up for the loss of Golden Tate. But I think what's going to ultimately happen is more Kerryon Johnson, or I take the risk at least, because he's the most likely to have a huge day. And it's, when you look at this team, it's really Eric Kendricks is so good in coverage. You're going to need a guy who plays more wide receiver. When they match wide receivers or fast tight ends against him, that's when he gets beaten. But running backs, even Theo Riddick, as good as he can be in that regard, the type of routes they're going to feature him on are Texas routes and little out routes and things like that. And they're not going to, I don't see them running a lot of bullet routes up the seam and wheel routes against Eric Kendricks. Now, if they do, that may happen, but you count on the volume there ultimately still. And Kerryon Johnson gets enough with the big plays and how he does, even as a receiver, that you got to take him.
And you mentioned the Golden Tate trade, and then rejoice. Oh, there's peace now, Matt. In the Matt, Marvin Jones, Kenny Golladay, the Civil War is over, and I know we're really, really excited to play Marvin Jones. I think that there is a stat that I wish I really need to do a better job of cataloging who tweets these things out, because there's so many great people in our community.
It's probably Graham Barfield. I think he had something up there.
It was like, when Marvin Jones gets 7 or more targets, you want to make sure you have him in your lineup. Does that apply to Kenny Golladay too?
Yeah, I mean, I think both guys are going to have nice days, and you just got to understand that with Jones, you may see him in more of a fully dimensional role. So you're going to see him, getting some routes over the middle that he didn't always get. But Golladay is going to continue to get those nice over routes where it's like, look, man, just you're going to get matched up against the outside shade corner. You're going to go up the field. You're going to work across, and voila, unless Jair Alexander's covering you, you're going to be wide open. And I think that that's what you're going to see in those elements. And also the Xavier Rhodes element still applies. And who are they going to put him on? Most likely Marvin Jones.
If he's in. Xavier Rhodes this week?
I think not, but there was just, I think Ian Rappaport just had something come across Twitter where he looks like he's at least trying to see if he can play. He was doing some resistance work, checking his ankle in pregame warmups, but there was a suggestion on Friday that he tweaked the ankle and aggravated the injury on Friday, and after him not being able to go last week, after not feeling good in warmups, it just seems doubtful that he's going to play today.
Well, if that's the case, yeah, I mean, that's the case. I think you're going to see 100 yards for each of those receivers, and you're probably going to see the Lions win by double digits in this game.
Gene, and I don't mean to really make light. I'm not trying to compare what we go through as fantasy players to real life things, but with Dalvin Cook and Leonard Fournette this year, we've gotten a bit gun shy about watching our running backs get hamstring injuries. Looks like Melvin Gordon's going to play. Should we be holding our breath? And this is going to be another tremendous matchup. Like, speaking of undercards, that Chargers-Seahawks matchup looks fantastic. What about Melvin Gordon? Should we be worried, or should we feel good? Like on one hand, you have full practice, and then you have questionable. And you have Anthony Lynn saying, "Well, he wants to play." Like, what's your vibe? What's your spidey sense about where Melvin Gordon's hamstring is, and whether we'll all wish he hadn't played this week?
Yeah, I think the vibe is pretty positive. The Chargers, unfortunately, are one of the underreported teams. I just don't feel like they've, the local beat writers have really settled in just yet and have enough sources. And we often don't get much from Schefter and Rappaport either. But both of them were pretty optimistic this morning in their overnight tweets that saying that Gordon not just want to test him out or otherwise, but that he's expected to play and will play. Schefter said will play. Rappaport said expected to play. So that was kind of the expectation, that they were just being cautious with him 2 weeks ago. He had some time through the bye week. He'd feel a lot better if there was a week of full practice, but Friday's full practice. The questionable tag doesn't bother me that much. But I do think there's reason to be concerned about Austin Eckler, who has had a fairly sizable role in that, different than how the Chiefs are using Spencer Ware or how the Steelers might approach their backup as well. This is a situation where even though Gordon has been really productive, Eckler's had a pretty big role. So if there's any concern about Gordon's conditioning, you might see a little bit of a shift in workload today, but I don't have too much concern about Gordon's injury.
And on the other side of this matchup, Gene, and this is why, like right now, go and see if Mike Davis is on your waiver wire. For that matter, see if Rashad Penny's on your waiver wire, because Mike Davis's injury history hasn't been great too. It feels like Chris Carson cannot get off the injury report. We know that Seattle has successfully established the run, successfully had some games where they get up to 30 or 35 running back carries. What about today? Do we expect Carson to be the guy who gets the majority of those carries?
I don't think so. Ian Rappaport was a little bit more optimistic this morning than I expected to be. I don't know why people have such a hard time reading Pete Carroll. That, it's always he's optimistic all the time. Well, not really. When he's optimistic, it's usually a pretty good sign.
I don't
when
know
he's
why.
not, when he's not, then you have to worry. So he said, what he specifically said was he's got a little groin thing he's feeling. He got through the day, meaning Friday. We just got to make sure on game day he's okay. If not, we'll go with other guys and move forward. We'll see. That is not rosy. Pete Carroll, we're ready to go. KJ Wright didn't practice all week, and Pete Carroll said he was fine. They have guys that don't practice all week, and then they don't list them on the game status report on the weekend at all. When Pete Carroll says there's a concern, there's a concern. And we went through this a month ago with Carson, where they really weren't sure if he was going to play. It sounded kind of optimistic, and then he was inactive. And we don't know if this is the same hip injury, and we don't know if it's hip flexor or hip pointer or some sort of impingement in the joint or some sort of labral thing he's working through, or a sports hernia. Nobody knows what this is. At least I'm not aware of what the specific injury is. So it's kind of hard to handicap, which one of these things is he more likely to play through effectively. All we know is that he is considered a game time decision. And then in the past, he's not been able to play through these game time decisions. So if he plays, great, but I would not be counting on him to be on the active roster for sure.
Okay, Matt, this is a great matchup. And this is one that has a really wide range of game script possibilities, because on one hand, you have the quality of these quarterbacks. And if you just put the ball in Phillip Rivers and Russell Wilson's hands and you said, just outscore the other guy, we'd love that for fantasy. But then this is also a Chargers team that wants to run their offense through the backfield, and a Seahawks team that very successfully established the run, and then hyper efficient Russell Wilson with guys on the other end of this passes, mainly David Moore, that are bailing him out of some questionable decisions and turning them into touchdowns. So we have, and you can really feel it too, is we have 6 teams on bye, and we have all these injury questions that the same names are coming up in these questions that I'm getting, Matt. Tyler Lockett, David Moore, Tyrell Williams, who was red hot going into the bye. What do we see? And maybe even if you want to sprinkle in a little Ed Dixon, who made that tremendous catch for a touchdown last week. I'm just saying, what I'm saying is Russell Wilson's giving these guys chances to make plays. And then you also have quarterback decisions, Russell Wilson versus another similarly ranked quarterback, maybe Ryan Fitzpatrick, Phillip Rivers. So when you look in your crystal ball, other than this being a tremendous competitive game, because the real football narrative storylines here of the Chargers have only lost to the Rams and the Chiefs. They've kind of beaten the teams they're supposed to, but still eked out some wins against teams they were supposed to. This is the second half of the season. This is finally the year the Chargers get things rolling. And the Seahawks it's working. The blueprint's working. It's taking. The new players are taking. The new offensive blueprint's working. What do we see in this really fascinating game? I
think we see a shootout. And I think that this is one of those underrated games on the card that could wind up being a bigger matchup than what's on Sunday night. I mean, this is a situation where you put it pretty well, which is if you put it in the hands of the two quarterbacks, that this could be a high scoring game. And I think that while, when you talk about running the ball, the Chargers haven't given up a whole lot, but who have they really had run the ball on them? Dion Lewis has had almost 100 yards. Todd Gurley, obviously. And then beyond that, banged up LaShawn McCoy, a pass happy Chiefs early in the season. And, and then you have the 49ers and, Matt Breida and Alfred Morris and, the other Black Knight who has his arm fall off after a couple of swings of the sword. So, I mean, it's one of those situations where, and I wasn't referring to Mostert, which was really a rough situation. I didn't even think about that. That was a really scary looking thing. I was really thinking about Breida, actually. He's kind of that guy. It's just a flesh wound. But yeah, they haven't really had anybody who wants to establish run on them. And Mike Davis certainly can do that if Chris Carson can't go. But on top of that, it does lead to big plays. And I think that that's what they're trying to set up in Seattle. And that Phillip Rivers, the thing with Phillip Rivers is that I had Will Hewlett on last week on a podcast talking. We were talking about our top 5 quarterbacks, and he mentioned Rivers as one of his guys, and how incredibly strong Phillip Rivers is. Like, you don't realize how strong he is because you see how gangly he moves and how awkward he moves. But his literal like strength is unbelievable, and he pulls through wraps like nobody's business. It can throw from awkward angles that people would say, well, Aaron Rodgers does that all the time. Yeah, and he looks graceful doing it. But Phillip Rivers is more like your granddad who can do like some boogie dancing, like the old Atlanta Falcons coach during the Jerry Glanville era, who was like dancing in the locker room to James Brown. You look at him and you go, that's kind of ugly, but he can move in rhythm. And that's kind of Phillip Rivers. He's like your uncle who used to be able to dance. So I would say that looking at it from that perspective, you are probably going to get, I think you're going to get rushing and receiving yards across the board with this team. That, to me, the only element where this could go south is that the Seattle defense is still underrated. Yeah. And what Tedrick Thompson is doing and Flowers, the rookie cornerback, is doing, you might find yourself in a situation where Rivers is the one more likely to have the bad day, and that this team goes south, this offense goes south. The next thing you know, Seattle's up, 24/7 and they pound the ball away, and there's, sacks and interceptions galore in this game. But I think most likely you're looking at a shootout, and I would start all your players in this.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one. Gene, something that makes a very important matchup more fun for me is who's going to play offensive tackle for the Ravens today?
Jermaine Elamanour, and I don't know. Yeah, that's unfortunate. Ronnie Stanley is one of the underrated tackles in the league, and that loss is going to be a big one. James Hurst has been out for a couple of weeks, and they've been kind of patching over with Elamanour through the week. But being without, even getting Alex Lewis back at guard, being without Stanley is going to be an issue.
And then on the other side, and Marcus Gilbert is going to be out, and then the Steelers have been really good running behind Marcus Gilbert. So, Matt, knowing what we know about this matchup, the matchup where Matt can't root for anybody, is there anybody you can root for from a fantasy perspective with the Steelers going to Baltimore, or is this one of those 12-9 kind of games?
Oh no, I'm rooting for the Steelers in this game. This is definitely a Steelers game, So, but I'd say when you take a look at this, I mean, I think that what we saw with the Ravens defense last week, if Steelers kind of borrow a little bit from the Carolina playbook and just kind of do a little bit more to widen that defense out, they might be able to find some running lanes for James Conner. But I mean, I think, obviously you're not going to veer away from Antonio Brown. I still think that you might be able to get some decent play out of Vance McDonald in this situation. Juju Smith-Schuster still a nice look. I feel good about what you have going on there. And Alex Collins is capable of giving you a really strong game in any situation. It's just that his downside is bad because he coughs up the football. But the reads that he makes in the run game, even are very strong. I mean, his vision is as good as anybody's in the league. It's just a matter of whether he's going to hold on to that football. And then we look at that defense, and I would say that the linebackers are generally are a little bit of the weakness in the passing game in terms of how you can get them to be a little bit over aggressive. So maybe the tight ends come into play here, but I would be reticent to start the Ravens wide receivers in this matchup.
Yeah, I'm pulling back on John Brown, even though he had a nice game against the Steelers in the first one. It's just not going to be time to throw downfield. And you mentioned Mark Andrews earlier. That's an interesting one because Nick Boyle would be the one who would stay in the block more. Gene, since Alex Collins came up, it was kind of a drama-filled week on the practice report for Alex Collins that seemed to end up with, hey, nothing to worry about here. Or am I overstating the calming effect of how things went on Friday?
No, I don't think so. I think we've seen this before with Collins earlier in the year where he doesn't practice much and then plays. The Ravens are one of the teams that tends to use the questionable tag pretty liberally, and it means a little bit more probable than questionable in a lot of cases. The full practice on Friday isn't a concern. I don't think this means we're going to see a lot of Ty Montgomery initially in his first game there. Probably Collins is going to see his usual workload without much limitation.
And you bring up a good point, by the way, Matt. And I don't think the Steelers released Ryan Switzer this week. I didn't miss that, right? This Ryan Switzer still a Steeler. That they could use him to like do some of the things like jet sweeps or fake jet sweeps and some different things. There's a creativity not necessarily there because, as you said, for folks who hadn't gone back and watched what Carolina did to Baltimore last week, and Gene, they're battling some stuff on the defense side of the ball too, right? Like C.J. Mosley. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm not sure what the status of C.J. Mosley is. It sounds like didn't look good finishing last week's game. Didn't practice much this week at all. They listed him questionable. I don't know if he's a little bit closer to doubtful. I think they're going to get Marlon Humphrey back, which would be nice. But Mosley's going to be a big loss if he's not there.
Yeah, more Vance McDonald. Really quickly, since we are talking about Carolina, we already talked about DJ Moore, Matt. On that Tampa side, how aggressive are we with Ryan Fitzpatrick? How aggressive are we with Deshaun Jackson, Chris Godwin, looking at the track record of what Fitzpatrick did before he got benched and knowing that the Panthers defense, the Panthers just as a team are coming on and playing at home this week?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I know that I've had that Moore or Godwin question in one of our leagues this week, and I ended up going with Moore only because I feel like that Tampa's defense is weaker than Carolina's. But if, for instance, if Tyreek Hill wasn't removed from the injury report and wasn't able to go, I would easily have replaced him with Chris Godwin. And because of the fact that Fitzpatrick goes to Godwin in the red zone, he goes to him in the middle of the field, and he's more accurate than Jameis Winston was. And we know that Jameis Winston doesn't see the middle of the field as well as he should at certain moments in the way that Fitzpatrick seems to be a little bit better at. So, from that perspective, if you need a guy like Chris Godwin, I'd see him as a viable wide receiver 3 in lineups this week, mainly because of the fact that he will get drawn against a safety. He will get drawn maybe against a flat linebacker like Thomas Davis, and be in situations for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to fool that defense. And then, of course, Jackson, who can cover Deshaun Jackson. It's just a matter of whether you can hit him, and I think that's enough right there. And it's also a situation where, as good as Mike Evans has played, I think that Fitzpatrick's better at finding the open man at the right time as opposed to I'm going to predetermine who I'm going to go to here. He's a wiser player who has blind spots, whereas Jameis Winston may be a more talented player who has fewer blind spots, and Jameis Winston is a more talented player who has more blind spots. And I think that's the difference between these two guys.
It's going to be interesting because the Tampa team that Ryan Fitzpatrick was leading to these victories or these close calls against the Steelers, for instance, that team had a different energy around it than this Tampa team. So we'll see.
Yeah, but that energy came back against the Bengals in the second half. It was like a light switch.
You saw it. So this is going to be fun. And I'm glad you mentioned Dante Jackson. He gave John Brown all he could handle last week. And between Jair Alexander, Dante Jackson, we've got some new number 1 corners that we are grooming. We have the number 1 corner down in Miami, and Matt Waldman, if you're not reading the top 10, the fresh fish, a little too on the nose because the whole Dolphins defense was fresh fish last week against Houston. Gene, will we see some Jets receivers get back and have an advantage, a chance to enjoy some of that fish?
Yeah, that one surprised me. I wasn't expecting to see either one of those guys back on the field. They didn't do anything until Friday, and fighting both of them, fighting through high ankle sprains. Neither one able to do much for at least a week, and now all of a sudden both of them the Jets are optimistic about them playing. I was poking a little bit of heat at the Jets beat writers who saw that Friday limited practice as a sign of optimism, but clearly they knew something, and maybe this was the Jets' plan all along. Doesn't look like either one of them are healthy. Robbie Anderson pretty much routinely plays through pretty painful injuries, and Noon was definitely on the tougher side of the scale as well. You're going to have some difficulty separating, I would think, and there's going to be a risk of aggravation, but there definitely appears to be a trend toward both of them playing today.
So this is one of those questions, Matt, because on one hand, Sam Darnold's looked like a rookie. They've been undermanned. Isaiah Crowell, robust 2 yards per carry without Bilal Powell getting most of the work. We may see Elijah McGuire back this week. But they go down to Miami to face a defense that was just horrid last week. Does this... so decisions like Crowell, maybe Anunwa, because Robbie Anderson would... And we are going to see Xavier Howard today, Gene, yeah?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be an issue with him.
So you would think that Howard's going to follow, or Howard's going to limit Robbie Anderson in addition to the injury. But Quincy Enunwa becomes interesting. Chris Herndon, Isaiah Crowell. Does the Jets offense come back to life because of the Dolphins defense, or was it not just that they were facing the Bears and the Vikings, but these are the growing pains of an offense with a rookie quarterback?
I'd say they're in critical but stable condition, to borrow some of Gene's lingo that he hopefully never has to use. But yeah, I would say that that's the situation, and part of that stability will be guys like Chris Herndon and Enunwa. I would keep starting Chris Herndon, especially against Miami, because Kiko Alonso cannot cover. Is it Baker? Jerome Baker, he's fast, but he has issues with coverage discipline. The other safety opposite Rashad Jones, I don't even know who he is.
DJ McDonald.
I don't want to know his name because he messes up all the
He hurts his own players in practice.
So, Rashad Jones can't be everywhere. If he could be, this team would be the best defense of all time at the way that he's playing. But, and it's just coincidentally went to University of Georgia. He just happens to be a good player. But you look at the situation, and it's been this way for a couple of years. So it's just one of those deals where I don't think Jordan Thomas is necessarily an outstanding play for the Texans as a tight end, for the same reasons that I didn't think that Michael Roberts wasn't an outstanding play last week for the 2 weeks ago for the Lions, because both of them had one thing in common. They went off against Kiko Alonso and the Miami Dolphins defense. And so I just think that it's an automatic that if you have a tight end who's going to be on the field and he can catch the football, you want him against that defense. And I do agree with you that Robbie Anderson is probably not a start. He's a desperation start at best because he will be on the field. Otherwise, you're looking at Enunwa and mainly Herndon, and then you're hoping the best for Crowell because this defensive front isn't great anymore, or doesn't have a huge run stopper in it that you're gonna be confident week after week. So there's a little bit of life there, but you're not Sam Darnold. I mean, if you're having hopes for Sam Darnold here, you're still going to see the player who, everybody in the national media is talking about how good he's going to be, but he's making USC quality mistakes when he doesn't have quality teammates around him that can help him avoid the middle of the field.
We've got just a couple of minutes here. I'm not going to get to touch on every matchup, although one of the ones I want to touch on, because I was unsuccessfully started a campaign. Well, maybe not unsuccessful. We'll see. I'll get to that in a second. But Gene, Rashard Higgins is going to be back for Cleveland this week, and this is one of those knee injuries that is based on the comfort level of the player more than like some of these muscle strains, soft tissue injuries. So Rashard Higgins actually did have some good chemistry with Baker Mayfield, played well, and this is a Kansas City matchup. People that are really digging deep or looking for that min-price GPP guy to fill your lineup in DFS, how confident should we be that Rashard Higgins is going to be ready to go and be what he was before his knee injury?
Who knows? Projecting the Browns and what they're going to do is a little bit difficult, especially with Greg Williams now as the interim head coach. There's been a positive trend all week. I think he's going to play. Generally, when players come back from these MCL sprains and they've been able to practice, you don't worry too much about their health. But, Higgins wasn't a huge part of the offense, I didn't feel, before he went down. So trying to decide whether or not he's going to, come back to 5 to 7 targets versus 3 to 5 is a tough projection.
And speaking of projecting that offense, so Matt and folks, Matt Waldman for Browns head coach. It's if only because I would love to hear more of what some of the thoughts on Greg Williams' mind are just dark. I mean, the guy just goes right to makes a left turn to suicide threats about Baker Mayfield versus Patrick Mahomes, and I think, okay, too much information. But let's get some information on what you might think for the Cleveland offense today. Freddie Kitchens, who is on the other side of the spectrum of it seems like somebody that we want to root for, coming from the Bruce Arians school. That's a good thing. Only had a week really to do this, but we were looking at this matchup and circling it because Kansas City and the game scripts help these offenses go to the top end of their range of outcomes in any given week. Baker Mayfield is a streamer. Nick Chubb, I could see Nick Chubb on 10 carries outproducing a lot of these guys we've been talking about that could get 15 or 18 carries. David Njoku coming off a targetless week. What do you see for the Browns offense against the Chiefs this week? Or is it just like Cincinnati? They're going to shut it down in the third quarter and nothing to see here.
I think that's what's going to happen because, and I think about Greg Williams real quick. And I remember the days when he had Keith Bullock and Samari Roll and Javon Curse and how great that defense was. And I just prefer to keep it there before, but that's where I'm in denial. It's before it all went south. But when you look at Cleveland, here's the thing: you recommended the Kansas City Chiefs defense as a rent defense for multiple weeks for this very reason. And one of the strengths of their defense isn't so much limiting yards. They give up yards by the bushel, but they have a very good attacking defense, and their safety plays getting a little healthier, so they're a little better in that front. And that means that they can attack the edges. I mean, D Ford and and Breeden Speaks and Chris Johnson, no Justin Houston, but still, they don't need it with what they've been doing. They've been able to get pressure off the edge, and where Cleveland is weak along its offensive line is at tackle. Their tackles cannot pass protect. Duke Johnson is up and down in pass protection. Nick Chubb has missed an assignment or two, but he's gotten better. So when you look at it from this angle, where does Baker Mayfield struggle? When edge protection forces him to make a quick decision, or doesn't allow him to get outside and try and throw from the flats. So when I look at this game, I think this is going to be a multiple interception game for Baker Mayfield. I don't think Rashard Higgins is going to make a huge bit of difference. And I think that this is a game where basically Kansas City's up by like 28 points by the end of the third quarter, if that. And we're going to be talking about, the Browns fans are going to be like, the changes didn't matter. And you're going to go, well, yeah, because just like the Cardinals, 1 week isn't going to make that huge of a difference in the yardage department and all the stats. They're simplifying things, and that was good for them. And that helped out a little bit for the team. But again, we don't know what Kitchens is going to bring to the table. We don't know what Greg Williams is going to agree to them doing. And you got to kind of look at it and say the Cardinals were a couple years removed from being good. The Cleveland Browns are a generation removed from being good.
Yeah, we started a couple of minutes late. I'm gonna have to do something fun here and just do. I'm gonna do just like a pop quiz. We've been doing Quienes Mas Macho, Gene, but I'm gonna change it up on you a little bit. All right. Okay. First of all, which one will be greater? The amount that Dante Fowler helps the Rams defense today, or the amount the loss of Marcus Davenport hurts the Saints defense?
Oh, I think Fowler's going to be more helpful. I like Fowler. I love the way he plays with bad intentions. He never really worked out, but I think this is a perfect situation for him. Put him around. Robert Quinn has been playing better. Aaron Donald is in the middle. They've got a great secondary. It's just a good setup for Fowler to be successful in some limited snaps.
Who throws more interceptions today, Gene? Nathan Peterman or Mitchell Trubisky?
Come on. Let's start with this. Let's hope that Nathan Peterman completes more passes than he throws interceptions. That seems to always be a struggle for him, unfortunately.
Baby steps. I like that. I like the baby steps. Okay, Gene. Whose offense makes you feel like Greg Williams and contemplating?
I don't ever want to feel like Greg Williams.
But okay,
I mean, there are some times where I'm getting into grumpy old man status, as Matt truly knows. But I don't know. I don't need any Greg Williams thoughts in my life.
We won't invoke Greg Williams. But I'll say this. Okay, who is a lover of? I'll try to be positive. You're right. Now you're helping me.
It's like an Eli Roth movie for Greg Williams.
Yeah, torture porn. Look, Gene. You're helping me now. Like I'm on the couch. I'll be more optimistic and positive.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
As a lover of defensive football, whose defense is going to make us feel better Monday night and show us more of the exemplar of great defensive football? Dallas against Marcus Mariota, or Tennessee against Dak Prescott?
Yeah. I'm getting hints in my ear. Am I supposed to be cheating? My first instinct is to always go with the pass rushers, and even with David Irving out, I like what Dallas does a little bit better up front than Tennessee.
That's excellent. Well, we've got a great week
Couldn't help myself.
ahead. No, you should. And I still feel like poor Dallas, they're never going to get their front seven on the field at once. If they do, it could be really excellent. But it seems like every time they're about to do that, something happens. Every time we're having fun, and you all give us the freedom to do that, something happens. Well, we have the rest of our Sunday morning work to do. You have your Sunday morning labs. I have to go through and look at every single team I have, Ron Gronkowski, all of my teams, and figure out what I'm going to do. We all have things to get ready for Sunday morning. It's a joy to get to spend it with these two guys and to spend it with y'all. Again, we're flirting with 500 viewers. We really appreciate the support. We appreciate the support for everything that we do at Football Guys. We hope we continue to serve you the way you deserve to be served. You deserve the best because you're so very classy.